Story time with Stephanie Story.
Hello, I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey. Welcome to my show. This is Story Time. Today, I am very honored to have my guest here because she has worked for nonprofits for the majority of her career. She's worked for organizations like Goodwill, the MacArthur Foundation, Lincoln Center. She's been a development and fundraising consultant for 18 years. And for those of you at home who know my weird obsessions, she's also a performer and has an MFA in acting from Shakespeare Theater Company's Academy of Classical Acting at George Washington University, which is a mouthful. Thank you very much for being here, Miranda Zola.
I am thrilled, Steph Story. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is good. So I emailed you and said, I really want to talk to somebody about what the process is like and what the thinking and what goes into writing for grants and writing for fundraising. And one of the reasons why I want to know about this, I think it's an important topic and I think it's a kind of writing that gets overlooked. But the other thing is because we are going through such a moment in this country with the pandemic and social unrest. I think there is so much need from nonprofits to do really good storytelling around their organizations because this is a tough moment and we need nonprofits to be out there doing the work. So I'm going to start with a really broad question and then see where it goes. And then I have lots of thoughts about this. When you're sitting down to write, I don't know, a fundraising email or a grant or any kind of fundraising, well, wait. First of all, is there a difference between what are the different kind of writing? Because I was about to lump all fundraising writing into the same bucket. And that's not right, is it? There's different things you look for.
Totally. And I think the first thing for development writing, similar to like PR writing or marketing communications, is who is your audience, right? And if your audience is an individual donor, which is going to be more like an email marketing campaign or targeted marketing campaign to an individual, very different style, tone, length than if you're writing to an institutional donor, corporate or foundation or government, or if that's an LOI or a grant. So it really is a totally different audience that you're speaking to, and there is a lot of crossover. It's both, it's persuasive writing in both, but I think there are very, very fundamental differences. Yeah.
So walk us through the process. You're working for an organization. You're going to try to help them get a big grant. Pick whichever kind of big grant you want to pretend we're going after, and lay out a little bit about what that process is like first, and then I'll ask you about the physical writing.
Yeah, so I would even back up before anything is put in writing. Just like any other kind of networking, development and fundraising is really about making connections, making a connection with another human being, right? So the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you know that you want to submit a grant to XYZ Corporation for your organization, you want to make a personal connection to somebody who has the power at that organization. So that's going to be starting with like the board of your organization, people I call it 6 degrees of fundraising, right? To try and find somebody who's got a connection there. So you can have a conversation, tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, that you have this intent to submit, and sort of get a little bit of buy-in on their end. I feel like more than anything, that is a critical component that a lot of people don't realize and don't put enough effort into, because a blind proposal is just that. It's a blind proposal, and chances are it's just not even going to be considered. So that's step one, is make a call, send an email, talk to somebody.
And when you're doing that, you're doing a lot of research before you do that to figure out who you're targeting and who this person is you're going to be talking about. And since you're having that conversation, you're dealing with messaging that's already been written by your organization about which parts that sell it well, right?
Ideally, yes, but sometimes no, right? So oftentimes, particularly as a consultant, right, I'll come into an organization and it's like, yeah, your messaging is okay, or it works for this purpose, but for this particular funder, where they're really looking for a certain tact. So let's say, you know, you're dealing with like a hunger relief organization, right? And you're applying to a foundation that their emphasis is more on racial equity. So how do you pivot your messaging so that you're explaining how what you does meets what that foundation or corporation is looking for? So there's a lot of remessaging I find that happens.
Okay, you don't have to give away all your trade secrets because you're a consultant, but what are some of the elements that you think that you have to put into a proposal that makes for a persuasive grant to hopefully get the people to give you money to support your wonderful cause?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is identifying the problem, right? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Need statement is what it's often called. And that and crafting that for me involves drawing statistics to back up your claim, right? So if I'm like writing a proposal for I don't know, M&Ms, let's say, and my claim is that every 5-year-old deserves to have M&Ms. So then I'm going to want to do some research to provide some statistics for why that is true. So that's part of like making that initial argument of what the problem is, why it exists, why you should care about it. Next part is, why does my organization have the best solution for solving that problem? And that would involve anything from, depending upon your organization. So you really need to know what your organizational strengths are. So if it's a new organization, you're gonna want to highlight, you know, innovation, new tact on the issue, collaborations, things like that. But this was where you'd include like your organizational history, background, and my favorite, outcomes. So, you know, how your organization has been successful in providing 5-year-olds with M&Ms. You know,
I love that example. That's great.
How many resonates with me? You know, how many 5-year-olds have received M&Ms in the past year, in the past 5 years, in the past 25 years as a result of our work? And then what I always love to include is a personal story, right? So, which is really ties into development writing as storytelling. And I really think it is. You're telling the story of your organization. Mm-hmm. You're telling the story of the need that exists in society. And then you're really ideally drilling down to the individual and how does your organization impact individual lives? So in the example we're using, I would try and get an interview with a 5-year-old telling how much they want in M&Ms and have never been able to have them. And thanks to these M&Ms that have delivered to them, they've had a fabulous week or something like that, right? So it's kind of an absurd example, but it really is, because people give, whether you're an organization or an individual. This kind of circles back to your first question or one of your initial questions about like what are the synergies between writing for an individual and writing for an organization. And the overlap is that we want to feel that we're making a difference in the lives of people. And so I always try and bring it down to individual impact on people, on human beings. And anything that I can show to indicate that is going to help make my case in the case of the organization.
Are you using like traditional storytelling tactics? Are you using like hook them in the first sentence to get them emotionally involved? Are you worrying about active voice? Are you worrying about all of those sort of crafty writing questions at the same time you're worried about this persuasive writing?
Yes. Yes. And I think there is a craft to it. I think for me personally, and this is where I find it really satisfying, there is an ebb and flow to a proposal. You want it to feel good as it comes off the page. You want it to sound right. You want it to have impact. You want, varying in rhythm. I mean, all of those factors I think make for a more compelling proposal. Because keep in mind, like real human beings are actually reading these. And I think those are things that impact individuals and the connection to the messaging.
So I'm just thinking about this in terms of, like, as a novelist, I worry about what my reader is feeling a lot. Like how am I taking them on as much as I'm worried about the physicality of the story and the plot, and this happened and this happened and this happened. I really think a lot about how at this moment versus at this moment versus this moment, the reader is feeling about it. And I'm hearing a lot of that in this, because that would impact a person's likelihood to get, like, if they're weeping at your grant proposal, that's probably good, right?
I don't know if that's ever happened, but at least not for a good way. But yeah, if they're moved, right? Or if they're intellectually moved, right? If you've made the argument, either intellectually or emotionally, and ideally both, right? And if you've taken them on somewhat of a journey.
Has this moment, our weird, difficult pandemic and social unrest moment that this country is going through collectively, and this strange political time and all this, seems to impact so many nonprofits. Mainly, has it changed? Does it change or impact your developmental writing in any way?
I mean, there was a huge pivot for a while to address. There was a lot of COVID-19 funding out there, and for sort of more boots on the ground, how are we addressing immediate needs? And the organization I work for now really was feeling impact of this on our own associates. So there really has been a tremendous push, I think, in the nonprofit world to get dollars to organizations that are addressing, food insecurity, housing insecurity, health, issues of health. And so really, there was a big push to sort of address that, and a huge pivot that happened in the writing as a result of that. So to align with that funding stream. So yeah, and then I think just what's happening. I'm not in the advocacy arena right now where I write for, but I do think in terms of what's happening in terms of national and global awareness, in terms of how do we view societal inequity. So right now I'm in the workforce development space, which is creating job opportunities. Really now there is this light, this beam that's focused on how racial inequity and injustice for many years has resulted in disparities in workforce. And so it's been interesting because I have really started changing the way that I frame the work that my organization does to address that larger need. And I think it's going to be a conversation that is going to be evolving over the next, definitely next few months and probably years as we see where the nation goes with things.
Why have you spent so much of your career working for nonprofits and working for social issues? Like, do you know where that comes from and where that drive? Because I have worked in nonprofits enough to know it's a lot of giving when you work for nonprofits. So,
yes.
So what drives you to work so hard and give so much of yourself to these various organizations?
I blame my parents. I was just really brought up with, just that idea that instilled in me that we're put on this world for two reasons: to live life to its fullest and to create a better world for all. And I really, what gives me most joy, I think, is if I feel like I've done some good. It's sometimes hard to see in the development world because really it's all about, like, can become a lot about numbers and figures and, have you met the budget and all those things that don't resonate with me. But when you really look at then what, organizational impact can do, and that you can't have that without dollars, that makes me feel good. And I can't imagine if I have to have a day job, I can't imagine doing something that was not in the nonprofit world. It's who I am.
One fascinating, and a lot of fascinating things about you. We have known each other for a while. But one thing is that you have an MFA in acting, and you are a theater actor. You are a performer. And I keep wondering about how that craft has impacted your storytelling or your fundraising. Does it change the way you approach this kind of writing, and how does it?
That's a really fascinating question. And I have sort of two different answers for it. Okay. The one is, I think, at its best, development writing is a highly creative process. At its worst, it can be very rote. And so I think my process, whether I'm working on a show or I'm working on a grant, is somewhat the same. And that is sort of like research, and then give myself time and space to just live with the question. I feel like when I allow myself to do that, so as an actor, that's like how I find my character is like, just give myself space and try to like go through the world inside the question of this character. And I do the same for development writing. Particularly if I'm working with like a new funder that I'm trying to like figure out the way in, or the path, just give myself space to like live with that question, let words come to me, phrases, and then I'll jot stuff down and like, oh, this is a tie-in, oh, this might work, or this. And so it's really just, I write a lot of notes. I'm a Post-it girl. I just got like notes everywhere. And somewhere in that, when I go to face the blank page, cohesion happens. That's kind of like ideally from that perspective. The other way that I think there's a huge tie-in is the power of language, the power of words to create and to create change. And that is like a belief I have in the core of my being. I do believe that theater has the ability to change hearts and minds and ultimately actions. And I think through development writing has that ability as well, that words can create change for the good.
The other element of that I was thinking about is, as you've been talking about nonprofits and theater, is this connection of empathy, right? In the theater, you have to learn to empathize with other people. And I would think having that empathy as a fundraising writer and trying to stir that empathy in the person who's reading it would be part of writing effective fundraising. Do you ever like feel that crossover of the empathy you learn in the theater affecting your fundraising writing? Or am I just making stuff up?
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting point. Sometimes I think more with the individual communication, targeted to individual giving, yes. But also with some of the grant work, yes, absolutely. Again, and trying to paint that picture, right, of like, why is this important? I think if you don't come from a place of empathy, your messaging just isn't going to get across. I think that's really true. And connection, personal connection, right? Just like you've got to like put yourself inside the mind, heart, spirit, body of a character that may be very, very different from you. You have to do the same, not only the population that the organization is serving, but also the funder, right? Who's looking at your proposal, trying to make a determination between hundreds, sometimes thousands of proposals of who they're going to fund, right? And so it really is, I think, stepping into those shoes and having empathy from that side as well. And as you mentioned, I work for the MacArthur Foundation, right? So I did get to see this process from the other side. So I do have some sort of insight into what that feels like. So it's sort of playing dual characters there. But yeah, very much so, very much so.
What's interesting to me is, I guess in my head, I would have put acting over here and fundraising over here. Like they don't on the surface seem to go together. But as we've been having this conversation, it's been interesting the number of things you've brought up that I've thought, boy, I bet acting was helpful in that. Like, for example, the relationship building and the connection. Well, goodness, that's like an entire style of acting where that's all you do is you learn to connect with other people and to build relationships.
Yep.
So you started as a fundraiser before you got your MFA.
Correct.
But have you been an actor your whole life? And did you know how much they would do this? Or did that come as a surprise for you?
Came as a surprise. I've been acting, so yes, I did my first show when I was 12. I have been acting since I was 9. First professional show when I was 12. So yes, acting is what I have always wanted to do and always done. I took a couple of long hiatuses in there, but I've done that for much longer than any sort of development writing. I had no idea there would be so much intersection. I came to development by way of publicity, really. So, and I'm always surprised at how creative the process can be when there is space for that, and how much overlap there is between acting and development writing. But like you said, it is, when you approached me about this, I was like, really? And you're like, yes, it's writing. And it is. And the act of writing is inherently creative and does like draw on the same things in many ways that acting does. And then the other thing, and so my master's degree is in classical acting, which is predominantly Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is, I would say, 99% the art of rhetoric. Every character is making a persuasive argument. And that is development writing.
Oh, come on. That's amazing. And
Right?
seriously, you were a little bit like, I don't know about this. And I'm like, no, I want to explore different kinds of writing, not just this. And what you do is absolutely storytelling, and it's absolutely writing, and it's serving a cause greater than yourself, which is something that I have been obsessed with these days. So thank you for being willing and coming to have this conversation with me. I so appreciate it. You have given me so much knowledge about an area that I really did not know much about, and you're brilliant, and you're brilliant.
You're brilliant.
So this is fascinating. We will continue it off camera, and the rest of you people can just deal with that.
Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie.